Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I have the honor to speak today on behalf of the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and my own country, Lithuania. The Baltic states align with the statement made by the European Union and its member states. Firstly, we would like to thank the President Ioan E. Donoghue for presenting the report of the International Court of Justice covering the period 1st of August 2022 to 31st of July 2023. The Baltic states welcome the report and commend the important work of the court. The issues that the court is facing are global in nature and concerns environmental protection, terrorism, drug trafficking, human trafficking, environmental protection, globalization. It has also faced a widening geographical representation of the states addressing the court. The report of the ICJ evidently illustrates that the states making recourse to the International Court of Justice are confident that the court, with its universal character, unique mandate, impartiality and integrity, authoritative value of its decisions, high legal standards, vast expertise and comprehensive jurisprudence, is a pillar of the rules-based international order and plays a vital role in the peaceful settlement of disputes. Relying on its authority in the international community, the court continues to play a fundamental role in prevention and settlement of international disputes between states, pacifically, as well as developing international law, advancing the rule of law globally, and directly contributing to the maintenance of international peace and security. The contribution of the court is also crucial for maintaining the health of the planet Earth, as we witness the dramatic consequences caused by climate change. Therefore, the international community is looking forward to the legal guidance of the ICJ on issues concerning obligations of states enshrined in international environmental law. Therefore, we would like to express our appreciation for a dedicated daily work of the court, its judges and all staff, and welcome the court's ongoing efforts in improving its procedures and working methods. We reiterate our strong support to the preeminent role of the International Court of Justice as the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. Mr. President, we firmly believe that the principle of peaceful settlement of disputes and respect for international law must be the main guidance for the conduct of all states as enshrined in the United Nations Charter. Therefore, we consider that further universal acceptance of the jurisdiction of the court needs to be enhanced and call on remaining UN member states, which have not done it yet, to accept the jurisdiction of the court to enhance its universal reach. We, the Baltic states, remain confident that the court will continue to successfully perform its crucial mandate in ensuring justice and contributing to stability and peace in the world. The war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine very poignantly demonstrates the need of the ICJ to deliver on its mandate. Mr. President, it's noteworthy that the International Court of Justice rulings entails the significant and far-reaching consequences, and we commend that the vast majority of the rulings of the ICJ are implemented by the parties to the dispute and recognized by the third states. However, in certain cases, the lack of enforcement power of the court's decisions remain an important factor. In particularly in those situations when the Security Council is paralyzed by veto power of one of its permanent members, we believe the international community should find a means to ensure that decisions, including orders of the court for the provisional measures, are complied with. As the most obvious example being the court's binding order on the provisional measures on the 16th March 2022, which orders Russia to immediately cease its military action that it commenced on the 24th of February 2022 in the territory of Ukraine. Russia has not obeyed it, as the war of aggression is continuing for more than 20 months already. In this regard, we are in favor of initiatives to reform the Security Council with the view of restraining the veto power of its permanent members when it concerns matters related to maintenance or restoration of international peace and security. The reform should also empower the Security Council with strengthened role in supervising execution of the decisions of the court. The blocking by Russia of the UN Security Council's attempt to address the matters related to aggression reveals the limitation of the UN system and the need for it to be revitalized. Mr. President, we commend the court for the ongoing efforts in improving its procedures and working methods. It is our strong belief that further digitalization of the procedures and working methods deserves careful and in-depth consideration. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the importance, necessity, and utility of incorporating new technologies in many areas of our lives, including our justice systems. Technologies and digitalization can facilitate judicial procedures and the participation of the parties to the proceedings. Mr. President, let me conclude by citing the first President of the General Assembly, Paul-Henri Spaak. I would not venture to assert that the International Court of Justice is the most important organ of the United Nations, but I think I may say that in any case is none more important. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Lithuania. I now give the floor to the representative of Azerbaijan on behalf of the non-aligned movement, NAM.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the non-aligned movement in connection with the consideration of Agenda Item 73 entitled Report on the International Court of Justice, to which we attach great importance. At the outset, allow us to thank the President of the International Court of Justice for her presentation of the report to the General Assembly on the activities of the International Court between the 1st of August 2022 and 31st July 2023, as requested by this body last year and contained in document A/78/4, of which we have taken due note. Mr. President, the non-aligned movement reaffirms and underscores its principled positions concerning the peaceful settlement of disputes and the non-use of threat of use of force. In that context, the International Court of Justice has a significant role in promoting and encouraging the settlement of international disputes by peaceful means, as reflected in the Charter of the United Nations, and in such a manner that international peace and security, as well as justice, are not endangered. At the ministerial meeting of the Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement held in July 2023 in Baku, Azerbaijan, the ministers of foreign affairs of the movement agreed to endeavor generating further progress to achieve full respect for international law, and in this regard commend the role of the International Court of Justice in promoting the peaceful settlement of international disputes in accordance with the relevant provisions of the Charter of the United Nations and the Statute of the Court, in particular Articles 33 and 94 of the Charter. Noting the fact that the Security Council has not sought any advisory opinion from the International Court since 1970, the non-aligned movement urges the Security Council to make greater use of the Court, the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, as a source of advisory opinions and interpretation of international law. In this regard, at the ministerial meeting of the Coordinating Bureau of the Non-Aligned Movement held in July 2019 in Caracas, Venezuela, the ministers of the movement decided to encourage those in a position to do so to make greater use of the International Court of Justice and to consider conducting consultations among the states members of the movement as and when appropriate, with a view to requesting advisory opinions of the court, including in cases in which unilateral coercive measures that are not authorized by relevant organs of the United Nations and are inconsistent with the principles of international law or the Charter of the United Nations may undermine international peace and security. Mr. President, the non-aligned movement takes this opportunity to invite the General Assembly and other organs of the United Nations and specialized agencies that are duly authorized by the General Assembly to request advisory opinions of the International Court of Justice on legal questions arising within the scope of their activities. Moreover, the states members of the movement reaffirmed the importance of the Court's advisory opinion issued on the 8th of July 1996 on the legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons. In this matter, the International Court of Justice concluded unanimously that there exists an obligation to pursue in good faith and bring to a conclusion negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament in all aspects under strict and effective international control. The movement further continues to call on Israel, the occupying power, to fully respect the 9 July 2004 advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on the legal consequences of the construction of a wall in the occupied Palestinian territory. We call upon all states to respect and ensure respect for the provisions therein for the realization of the end of the Israeli occupation that began in 1967 and the independence of the State of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. Mr. President, I would like now to offer additional remarks in our national capacity. The report of the International Court of Justice refers to the pending cases in respect of Azerbaijan and Armenia regarding the application of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, including the Court's orders indicating provisional measures. Azerbaijan instituted proceedings before the Court on the 23rd September 2021 to hold Armenia accountable for systematic violations of the said convention. The scale of these violations committed during Armenia's 30-year aggression and occupation and after the end of the war in the fall of 2020 are shocking. Tens of thousands of people were killed, more than 200,000 Azerbaijanis were expelled from their historical homeland in Armenia. All occupied territories were ethnically cleansed of more than 700,000 Azerbaijanis. Hundreds of cities, towns, and villages in my country were razed to the ground, and tremendous losses were inflicted on Azerbaijan's cultural and religious heritage and the environment. Furthermore, Azerbaijan is now one of the countries in the world most contaminated with landmines and other explosive devices, as Armenia planted hundreds of thousands of such mines and devices in the formerly occupied territories to deter Azerbaijani civilians from returning to their homes. It goes without saying that Armenia's aggression and occupation of a large portion of Azerbaijan was not simply a war for territory. Rather, it was a war for ethnic purity in one of the most horrific campaigns of racial discrimination in recent history. In its application to the ICJ, Azerbaijan stated that this dispute arose because Armenia was engaged and continues to be engaged in a series of discriminatory acts against Azerbaijanis on the basis of their national or ethnic origin within the meaning of CERD, and that Armenia's policy and practice of anti-Azerbaijani discrimination are fueled by ethno-nationalist goals of creating a mono-ethnic state comprised exclusively of ethnic Armenians in Armenia and in portions of Azerbaijan's sovereign territory. Azerbaijan further stated that Armenia's policy and conduct of ethnic cleansing, cultural erasure, and fomenting of hatred against Azerbaijanis systematically infringed their rights and freedoms in violation of CERD, and asked the court to hold Armenia accountable for its breaches and redress the harm thereby visited on Azerbaijan and its people. In its provisional measures of 7 December 2021, the ICJ ordered Armenia to, I quote, take all necessary measures to prevent the incitement and promotion of racial hatred, including by organizations and private persons in its territory targeted at persons of Azerbaijani national or ethnic origin, and to refrain from any action which might aggravate or extend the dispute before the court or make it more difficult to resolve." End quote. There is extensive evidence of Armenia's non-compliance with these measures to the present day. Armenia's smear anti-Azerbaijan hate campaign, along with its denial of the right of Azerbaijani refugees to return to their homes in Armenia, continued erasure of Azerbaijani cultural heritage on its territory, and refusal to shed light on the fate of thousands of missing Azerbaijani citizens and disclose the locations of landmines and other explosive devices it laid on the territory of Azerbaijan evidently aggravates the dispute. Moreover, Armenia refrained from condemning and punishing hate crimes, racist statements, and incitement to violence against Azerbaijanis, and not only failed to prohibit it, but affirmatively cooperated with various ethno-nationalist groups inciting anti-Azerbaijani hatred and allowed the promotion of racial hatred in schools and media. Mr. President, Armenia's ongoing disinformation campaign is an illustration as to how fast lies spread and used as ammunition for slanderous and destabilizing purposes. It is therefore important that the relevant stakeholders, if genuinely interested in truth, evaluate claims with extreme caution and great reserve, and rely on evidence that is fully conclusive and obtained by skilled examination. In the context of the cases before the court, it is also critical to see the bright line that must be drawn between a dispute as to racial discrimination and a state's right and responsibility to protect its people, react to an unlawful and building military presence of foreign troops and illegal armed formations on its territory, and ensure criminal liability for serious breaches of international humanitarian law and international human rights law. It is important that the international community remember and insist on accountability for the war that Armenia unleashed, the atrocity crimes that it committed, and large-scale ethnic cleansing and barbaric destructions that it carried out with the sole purpose of realizing its racially motivated territorial claims. Azerbaijan will continue its efforts to end impunity for serious violations of international law, promote the rule of law, and build, strengthen, and sustain peace and stability in the region. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Azerbaijan, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan on behalf of the Arab group.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. السيد الرئيس تشدد المجموعة
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Arab group would like to highlight the importance of the role of the International Court of Justice, which was created as the judiciary branch of the United Nations to uphold peace and to protect peace. The ICJ has been the guardian of international law for over 7 decades. It has played an increasingly important role for the peaceful resolution of disputes among states and to provide advice to the various organs of the United Nations regarding urgent matters of international law. And on this point, the Arab group would like to stress that the role of the ICJ has become even more important now than in the past, given the increase in the challenges that the international legal order is facing in the post-war order. The Arab group appreciates the role of the ICJ in resolving the legal disputes that are submitted to it by states, and in presenting opinions regarding the legal issues and legal opinions of various UN organs. And here we'd like to hail the role of the ICJ in issuing rulings on and opinions on a number of issues and judgments regarding obligations of states on number of important matters. The Arab group welcomes the report of the ICG for the year 2023 regarding the role of the ICG in strengthening the primacy of the law, or the rule of law, and to encourage understanding among young people of international law through various internships offered by the ICG. The Arab states would like to stress the importance for these states in abiding by the decisions and opinions of the court, given that these are objective and the judges are highly competent and have a high level of integrity. Now, regarding the current situation in Gaza, the Arab group would like to recall the advisory opinion of the ICG regarding the wall of separation in 2004 and the obligation imposed on Israel as the occupying power to respect the basic principles of international humanitarian law. The Arab group would also like to recall the importance of the decision of the General Assembly of 247. That decision requests the ICJ to issue an advisory opinion regarding the legal impact of the continued violation by Israel of the rights of the Palestinian people and the impact of the long-term occupation, expansion of settlements, and measures aimed at changing the status of the holy sites of Jerusalem. And based on that, the Arab League and Arab states have sent various written messages regarding the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the need for Israel to respect as the occupying power the legal status quo and the historical status quo in Jerusalem, the need to put an end to occupation and to put an end to settlements in occupied Palestinian territories, including in Jerusalem East, and the need for the international community to put an end to unilateral measures by Israel. Lastly, Mr. President, the Arab group would like to stress the increasing role of ICJ to ensure the stability and security in the world, and its extremely important role in resolving disputes and in resolving them through legal means. The Arab group is sought to strengthen the role of the ICG by implementing its decisions and advisory opinions. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Jordan. I now give the floor to the representative of Mauritania on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC.
Mr. President, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and its 57 member states are grateful to the President of the Court of its report and briefing before the General Assembly. The principle and objective of the Charter and the fundamental basic of international law are being undermined, risking the stability of the multilateral order and the protection of generations of people from the scourge of war. The establishment of the Court is a watershed moment in the history of international law and international relations. The Court has always and will remain the principal judicial organ. Adherence with and respect of its judgment is necessary to ensure international peace and security. The OIC has supported and participated in the peaceful settlement of dispute, included on cases and advisory opinion before the court, most notably in the Gambia versus Myanmar, as well as the advisory opinion on the construction of the wall in the occupied Palestinian territory in 2003, and recently on the question of Palestine as requested by the General Assembly in its resolution. The OIC rejects Israeli violation and willful failure to uphold its responsibility and obligation as stated in numerous UN resolutions, including the IGC advisory opinion on the war, which has led to a worsening situation on the ground, reaffirming its emphasis on the centrality of the Palestinian issue for the entire Islamic Ummah and supporting the inalienable right of the Palestinian people, most notably their right to self-determination and the return of Palestinian refugees, their right to independence and the abandonment of the independent and sovereign state of Palestine on the border of June 4, 1967, with its capital Al-Quds Sharif. The OIC sent a submission to the court on the General Assembly request on the legal consequences arising from the ongoing violation by the Israeli of the right of Palestinian people to self-determination from its prolonging occupation, settlement, and annexation of the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, included measures aimed at alerting the demographic composition, character, and status of the Holy See of Jerusalem, and from its adoption of related discriminatory legislation and measures. Mr. President, the OIC expressed its appreciation for the unprecedented participation by state and other international organizations, which confirm the importance and centrality of the question of Palestine to the United Nations, as well as their commitment to the rule of law. In this regard, it has continued to encourage its member states and other international partners to submit their respective evidence during the ongoing hearing at the ICJ. In its submission to the ICJ, the OIC reaffirmed Israel's continuous violation of the UN Charter through its prolonging occupation, building of settlement, and the imposition of an apartheid regime, and call for the determination of the legal consequences of Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory. Today, we are witnessing the consequences of the impunity Israel, the occupying power, has enjoyed for 75 years. In this regard, the OIC condemned in the strongest term Israeli crime and Israeli aggression against the occupied Palestinian territory and the heinous massacre perpetrated against civilians in Gaza Strip by the Israeli occupation forces, which result in 9,155 civilian casualties, including 3,760 children. The OIC also warns on the danger of continuing the policy of deliberate targeting of civilian and collective punishment accompanied by policies of starvation, water deprivation, and the stopping of the only power generation station in Gaza Strip, suspended due to the prevention of full access, portending a real disaster for all health and humanitarian service in contravention of international humanitarian law and amounting to the commission of international crime, including the crime against humanity. The OIC strongly condemned the blatant targeting by the Israeli-Britain occupation forces Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza Strip, which killed and injured hundreds of innocent sick, injured and displaced innocent civilians. This represents a war crime and a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law, ethnic and international and humanitarian instruments. The OIC also strongly condemned Israeli bombing of mosques and churches, including the St. Porphyry's Greek Orthodox Church, where families were sheltering, killing 10 of Palestinians. The OIC reiterated that Israel, the occupying power, bears full responsibility for the fate of civilians in the Gaza Strip and the real tragedy they are subjected to under bombardment, siege, and starvation, without electricity, food, or clean water, while being forced to abandon their homes, and for the policy of indiscriminate collective punishment that is applied in a flagrant violation of the international law and international humanitarian law. as well as its legal responsibility as the occupying power in accordance with the Geneva Convention. We call for the immediate cessation of the barbaric aggression of the Israeli occupation forces against the Palestinian people and the immediate lifting of the siege imposed to Gaza Strip. The OIC call upon the international community to act swiftly and to hold Israeli, the occupying power, accountable for these heinous war crimes against the Palestinian people and humanity as at large, and call for immediate intervention to halt this massacre. Mr. President, as I conclude, allow me to recall another prominent OIC issue before the ICJ related to the lift-off Rohingya Muslim minority of Myanmar. While the OIC welcoming the adoption by the UN Human Rights Council on the resolution on the situation of human rights of Rohingya Muslim on 7 July 2022, and the subsequent UN General Assembly resolution of 15 December 2022. It has continued support to the current legal case filed by the government of Gambia at the International Court of Justice in The Hague. In this connection, we underscore the state responsibility of the Myanmar government to protect armed civilian minority communities, notably the Rohingya Muslim, against systematic discrimination, including killing, rape, eviction, and forced expulsion. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mauritania. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Mr. President, my delegation would like to thank Judge John A. Donoghue, President of the International Court of Justice, for presenting an eloquent report on the judicial activities of the court for the period between 1st August 2022 and 31st July this year. We thank her and the Vice President of the ICJ, Judge Kirill Gevorgian, for guiding the work of the court during this period. We take this opportunity to congratulate Judge Leonardo Brandt on his appointment as a member of the court, succeeding the late Judge Antonio Trinidad. Mr. President, as a country who has accepted the compulsory jurisdiction of the ICJ by declaration, we reaffirm our support to the role of ICJ as a principal judicial organ of the UN in settling the disputes peacefully among member states in accordance with the principles and purposes of the UN Charter. We recognize that the ICJ enjoys member states' trust and confidence for its crucial role in the interpretation and clarification of the rules and principles of international law, as well as in the progressive development and codification of international law. We acknowledge that the court has fulfilled its task admirably and has acquired a well-deserved reputation as an institution that maintains the highest legal standards in accordance with its mandate under the Charter of the United Nations and its own statute, which is an integral part of the Charter. Taking stock of the work performed since its first sitting in April 1946 and the submission of first case in May 1947, the court is seized of 190 cases till July 2023. It has delivered close to 150 judgments and rendered 28 advisory opinions. As the report indicates, during the judicial year 2022-2023, the court delivered judgments in 4 cases. It handed down 20 orders required for different purposes at different stages of proceedings of the cases and held public hearings in 6 cases. During the period under review, the court is seized of 5 new contentious cases and 2 requests for advisory opinions. The report further reveals that as of 31st July 2023, the court has 18 contentious cases and 2 advisory proceedings pending on its docket. The volume and quality of work demonstrates that the court has stood the test of fulfilling the task of settling disputes between the states. It's beyond doubt that the court has acquired a well-deserved reputation as an institution. Concerning the subject matter and issues, the cases before the court involve complex factual and legal issues relating to a wide range of areas, including territorial and maritime delimitation, human rights, reparation for internationally wrongful acts, environmental protection, the jurisdictional immunity of states, and the interpretation and application of international treaties and conventions concerning, among other things, diplomatic relations, the elimination of racial discrimination, the prevention of genocide, the suppression of financing of terrorism, the prohibition of torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, and the safety of civil aviation. Mr. President, the geographical spread of the cases brought before the court and the diversity of their subject matter clearly illustrates the universal character of the court's jurisdiction and the importance of the court's role in upholding the rule of law. In the performance of its judicial functions, the court has remained sensitive to political realities and sentiments of states while acting in accordance with the provisions of the UN Charter, its own statute, and other rules of international law. Significantly, the court has not lost sight to adapt itself to the working methods, including holding of public hearings in a hybrid format post-COVID-19 pandemic, setting itself a demanding schedule of hearings and deliberations in handling of emergent situations and in dealing with the complexity involved in the cases submitted to it. Mr. President, the Trust Fund for Judicial Fellowship Program of the Court, established in 2021 following the adoption of General Assembly Resolution 75/129 in 2020, is a welcome initiative. We are pleased to note that the Trust Fund has had a promising start, and the first 3 fellows selected with the sponsorship of the Trust Fund have successfully completed the program. We are further pleased to note that for the year 2023-2024 intake, the court had received 148 applications from 94 nominating universities located all over the world, with 65 universities seeking sponsorship through the Trust Fund for the 91 candidates they nominated. Out of such a large number of applicants, the court has selected 15 candidates, including 3 candidates from developing countries, which includes India, Iran, and Tunisia. The number and diversity of applications received by the court demonstrates the continuing and growing interest in the Trust Fund-sponsored programs. We appreciate the court's efforts towards ensuring the greatest possible global awareness of its decisions through its publications, multimedia offerings, and the website, which features the court's entire jurisprudence as well as that of its predecessor, the Permanent Court of International Justice. These sources provide useful information for states wishing to invoke the jurisdiction of the court. Before concluding, we wish to reaffirm our strong support to the court and acknowledge the importance that the international community attaches to its work. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of India. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Mr. President, we'd like to extend our appreciation to Madam President of the International Court of Justice for presenting the comprehensive report on the court activity of the past 2 years. We also hold in high regard the unwavering commitment of the judges who serve on the International Court of Justice. Mr. President, over the past year, the International Court of Justice has assumed an indispensable role in international life. It has been instrumental in promoting peaceful settlement of disputes and fostering friendly relations among nations. Throughout the years, the court engagement has been particularly notable, evident in its handing down of 4 judgments and rendering of 20 orders and consideration of 18 contentious cases and 2 advisory proceedings, as elaborated in the latest report. We echo the court assessment that geographical spread of cases brought before the court and the diversity of their subject matters illustrate the universal and general characters of the court's jurisdiction. Moreover, this has demonstrated that the trust that member states have placed in the court's capacity to strengthen international law as the cornerstone for peaceful coexistence among nations. In line with this objective, it is equally important that all member states diligently fulfill their obligations under the United Nations Charter and the international treaties to which they are contracting parties. This encompasses the obligation to comply with judgments and rulings issued by the international courts and tribunals, including the International Court of Justice. Mr. President, in addition to the dispute settlement function of the court, we would like to highlight another core function of the International Court of Justice, namely its provision of advisory opinions in accordance with Article 96 of the United Nations Charter. An advisory opinions contribute significantly to elucidation of the international law, including the legal aspect related to the major issues of international concern. One such critical concern is climate change, a challenge that extends from our present generation to our posterity, posing an existential threat to many low-lying nations, small island states, and coastal regions worldwide. While efforts have been made, including net zero commitments, they fall short of the comprehensive response needed. More ambitious and immediate actions are imperative. They include seeking an advisory opinion of International Court of Justice, clarifying state obligation under various treaties, including the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, among others. This year marks the first time a number of requests for climate change-focused advisory opinions have been sought from international courts and tribunals, including a request from the United Nations General Assembly for an ICJ advisory opinion on March 29, 2023. These processes could create profound impacts upon how environmental obligations under international law, and specifically those related to the impacts of climate change, are interpreted. We believe that the legal opinions provided by ICJ will establish prerequisites for the more robust implementation of commitments related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, especially given that the countries which contribute to the least to climate change are now suffering the most from its negative impacts. We look forward to the Court's clarification of the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, as well as the obligation of cooperation, including through transfer of green technologies and the responsibility in case of violation of such obligation. We firmly believe that the court advisory opinion shall reinforce our collective endeavors to combat climate change and enhance the role of the court as the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, addressing a matter of enduring significance for the future of humankind. In this regard, we welcome the court orders inviting states to furnish information on the questions submitted to the court and fixing the deadline thereto. Vietnam stands ready to work closely with and receiving the support of other United Nations members in our common endeavors to combat climate change for our planet and our future generation. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Vietnam. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
President, let me begin by thanking President Donoghue for her presentation last week of the annual report of the International Court of Justice. The report sets out the considerable activity of the court over the last 12 months in what has undoubtedly been a busy year for international justice. As this was President Donohue's final address to the General Assembly in this capacity, Ireland would like to thank her for her service both as President of the Court since 2021 and as a judge since 2010. She has made a significant contribution both to the Court and to international law, and this is widely acknowledged. The large number of cases currently before the Court, as well as those disposed over the past year, involve a very wide variety of legal issues. They also reveal a broad geographic spread, with parties to cases coming from all continents. The cases before the Court are, however, of interest to all states, and we in Ireland, for instance, are studying carefully the Court's recent judgment in the Nicaragua and Colombia continental shelf delimitation case, which is of relevance to all states with broad continental margins. In addition to contentious cases, the Court has before it at the moment 2 requests for advisory opinions. This increasing resort to the Court is, in our view, a demonstration of the confidence that states have placed in its integrity, independence, and expertise. It is also testimony to their trust in the vital role of international law in settling international disputes. President, this trust is shared by Ireland, and we were happy, therefore, to make a declaration accepting as compulsory the jurisdiction of the Court a number of years ago. We encourage all states that have not yet done so to actively consider making such a declaration. Indeed, we endorse President Donohue's comments earlier this year when she said, and I quote, "States that are truly committed to the rule of law must entrust international courts and tribunals with judicial settlement of legal disputes. When a state avoids binding and compulsory third-party dispute settlement, its invocations of the rule of law sound hollow." President, the Court also plays a valuable role in clarifying international law through its advisory opinion function. This year, Ireland has submitted a written statement to the Court in relation to one of the requests for advisory opinions before it, and is actively considering the submission of a written statement in relation to the other. We continue to attach high importance to the Court's important advisory function. In concluding, I want to reiterate once more Ireland's strong support for the Court and its vital role in the international system. Thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ireland. I now give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Costa Rica.
Señor Presidente.
President, we meet once again to consider the report submitted to the General Assembly by the International Court of Justice. This solemn occasion between 2 principal organs of the United Nations is an exercise in accountability, but also an opportunity to improve the functioning of the international justice system. Costa Rica thanks the International Court of Justice for its report A/78/4, and in this regard would like to make the following points. First, we are encouraged by seeing a significant rise in the activity of the Court. This is a positive sign of increased state trust and confidence in submitting their disputes to the principal judicial organ of our organization, which is consistent with Article 1 of the United Nations Charter. This strengthens the international justice system and legitimizes it as an essential rules-based body of international relations. However, we are concerned that a considerable number of states, including those tasked with electing court justices, still do not recognize its jurisdiction. This regrettable practice of not recognizing the court's jurisdiction is inconsistent with international obligations derived from the basic principles of international law. Equally concerning are the repeated and serious breaches of Article 94 of the United Nations Charter and the failure to comply with the court's decisions and judgments, especially the qualified legal opinion resulting from its advisory opinions. While its advisory opinions are non-binding as a matter of law, they are intended to clarify applicable international law and should be taken with special consideration. Compliance with international law cannot be selective. The decisions and judgments of the International Court of Justice must be followed without excuses, not only when it's convenient or favourable. Non-compliance with Articles 93 and 94 of the Charter not only undermines the mandate of the International Court of Justice, but also the entire foundation of our organisation. If a state claims to be part of a rules-based international order, it must comply with those rules, even when it's difficult or not in their own self-interest. Second, the report demonstrates once more the close relationship between the maintenance of international peace, security, and justice. It is astonishing that despite the immeasurable work done by the Court, it only receives approximately 1% of the United Nations regular budget. And yet, it is subject to budgetary restrictions, as if it were a problem, rather than a central objective of the United Nations system, which is to settle disputes peacefully. In other words, one of the 6 principal organs of this organisation, the principal organ charged with the administration of international justice, receives a budget that does not reflect the organ's importance. Is this the level of importance we are giving to a true and efficient international justice, while global military spending continues to increase shamelessly and exponentially? Words without action are a drop in the ocean. Costa Rica regrets that resources continue to be directed to war and not to the peaceful settlement of disputes, nor to the protection of human rights, and still less to the objectives of sustainable development. In fact, the Court's annual budget is equivalent to the cost of a state-of-the-art fighter plane. A single plane. Is that not a disgrace? The Court should receive a budget commensurate to its high quality and, above all at the moment, its high quantity of contribution to international law and the international order. Thirdly, and as the report highlights, the geographical distribution of the cases brought before the Court and the diversity of the issues before it illustrates the universal and general nature of the Court's jurisdiction. As I noted at the start, confidence in the Court is a positive sign of the benefits of international law for dispute resolution. But the International Court of Justice, like other international jurisdictions, such as the International Criminal Court, depends fundamentally on the principle of good faith for its decisions to be enforced. The lack of a system to ensure the enforcement of international judicial decisions is a fundamental problem of the regulatory mechanisms of international relations, and the United Nations is called upon to address both compulsory international jurisdiction and the compulsory enforcement of international judicial decisions as a matter of priority in its strategic objectives. My country also believes that access to international justice must be democratized by adopting other working languages of the Court, particularly Spanish. Spanish-speaking countries have traditionally been fundamental supporters of the Court's work, and this support and trust should be reciprocated through the use of Spanish as one of the working languages of the Court. President, Costa Rica reiterates its steadfast commitment to the International Court of Justice and strongly calls on all states to fully respect international law and its institutions as the cornerstone of our collective international peace and security architecture. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Costa Rica. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru.
Mr. President, Peru is a country committed to the coordination, adoption, and implementation of multilateral policies, as well as for upholding principles, rules, and practices of international law. And therefore, we welcome the report and the results of the management and functioning as presented to the General Assembly by Magistrate Joan Donoghue as President of the International Court of Justice. In this context, it's important to stress the important role that the ICJ plays as the supreme judicial organ of the United Nations in peaceful resolving of disputes. This organ has demonstrated its usefulness for maintaining international peace and security and has become essential in strengthening the multilateral activity of states to achieve these goals through justice based on respective treaties, good faith, and equality. Even more, it contributes in a bold way to the promotion of the rule of law at the international level by upholding basic principles such as the division and separation of powers, balance and control of power, abiding by the law, legal security, prohibition of arbitrary acts, implementation of measures in response to infringement on functional responsibility, justification of the use of public force, etc. It's important to highlight that the court has ruled within its jurisdiction on ambitious matters such as the law of the sea, water resources, law of treaties, territorial and maritime delimitation, the sovereign rights on natural resources within the continental shelf. It's also important to note the need for the enforcement of the decisions of the court on disputes between states. Bearing that in mind, abiding by the rulings issued by the International Court of Justice is essential to bolster the relations of friendship and cooperation among nations. By the same token, it's necessary to take into consideration the advisory opinions of the court in conformity with Article 96 of the United Nations Charter. Bearing that in mind, we would respectfully encourage states who are still not subject to the jurisdiction of the court to consider the option of recognizing the jurisdiction of the court in conformity with Article 36, paragraph 2 of its statute. Peru welcomes the outreach efforts of the court to enhance the institutional presence of the court. We believe that it's a good idea to use the online resources and services available on the website of the court, including broadcasting all its public hearings as well as providing periodic information on its activities and updating its social media resources. Peru reiterates its gratitude to the host state, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, for its constant and significant support to the work of the court. We would also like to highlight the importance of cooperation between the court and the other main organs of the organization that are based in New York. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to reiterate the unwavering support of Peru to the work of the International Court of Justice. Its role is crucial in the peaceful and rational resolution of international disputes and to confront in an effective way major global challenges in defense of an international order that is threatened by breakdown of legal norms and the search for immediate solutions based on violence. This last point is unacceptable. This is why it is essential to support and consolidate the work of the court in this area. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Peru. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bangladesh aligns itself with the statement of the OIC as delivered by Mauritania under this agenda item. We thank the President of the International Court of Justice for her report. Mr. President, as the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, we commend ICJ for its crucial role in promoting pacific settlement of international disputes, upholding the rule of law at the international level, and thus contributing to the maintenance of international peace and security. We also recognize the significance of court's important jurisdiction to issue advisory opinions which contribute to the clarification and development of international law and thereby to the strengthening of peaceful settlement of disputes. We express our satisfaction at the progress of the court's work. We believe enhanced cooperation by the court with the UN Security Council as well as member states is crucial towards the fulfillment of the ICJ's mandate in a more robust manner and thus advancing rule of law at the global level. In this context, Bangladesh reiterates its commitment to extend all cooperation to the court in its functions. Mr. President, as we deliberate today on the work of the International Court of Justice, please allow me to highlight 3 priorities of Bangladesh from the report. First, as a country hosting over 1 million Rohingya Muslims who fled Myanmar in the face of mass killing, rape, arson, torture, and other forms of atrocity crimes, we attach crucial importance to the Gambia versus Myanmar case instituted under the 1948 Genocide Convention. In this regard, we recall in particular the order of the court dated 23 January 2020 indicating provisional measures where the court recognized the Rohingya as a protracted group within the meaning of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention and acknowledged presence of a real and imminent risk of irreparable prejudice to the rights of the Rohingya in Myanmar. We call upon Myanmar to comply with the order in letter and spirit. Furthermore, we call upon the United Nations Security Council to diligently oversee the implementation of the provisional measures issued by the court on 23 January 2020. Second, Bangladesh strongly denounces all illegal acts by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including during its current indiscriminate and brutal military operations in Gaza in violation of principle of international humanitarian law and rules of war. We also condemn its continued occupation and adoption of policies and practices in the occupied Palestine territory in flagrant violation of international human rights law. We also call upon to scrutinize Israel's claim of right to self-defense as an occupying power under international law. Bangladesh is pleased to participate in the ongoing proceeding in the court on advisory opinion on legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and looks forward to the upcoming hearing in the court. Third, we wish to also closely follow the ongoing proceedings in the International Court of Justice for advisory opinions on the legal implications of climate change on the rights of present and future generations. Although our carbon footprint is negligible and we have almost no contribution to global climate change, we are one of the worst victims in the face of climate debacle. The future of our present and future generations are seriously jeopardized due to the socioeconomic, environmental, cultural, and human security implications of the climate change. As such, we see the proceedings in the ICJ on climate change as a monumental milestone in our relentless pursuit of climate justice. Bangladesh is immensely proud and appreciative to be actively involved in this historic process. I thank you all.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bangladesh. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. In his speech at the inaugural sitting of the court on the 18th of April, 1946, the very first President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Paul Henry Spark, said, and I quote, "I would not venture to assert that the International Court of Justice is the most important organ of the United Nations, but I think I may say that there is none more important," unquote. Mr. President, Singapore agrees with this particular sentiment. The court is a cornerstone of our rules-based multilateral order. Judicial settlement is not the only means for the settlement of disputes, but the fact is that the court represents a collective commitment to an important ideal, an ideal of a world where law and principle, not force and arms, are used to resolve disputes. We live in troubled times, that much is certain, but it is precisely now, more than ever, that we need the court. We must remember that the court itself was born of war, and its very existence, as was said by Mr. Salomon Jean-René de Montky, who was the former mayor of The Hague, and he said during the court's inaugural session in 1946, and I quote, "The court is an appeal to the conscience of the nations, telling them that force of arms is not the only nor the best way of securing what they consider to be their rights," unquote. The question for us is whether we still believe in the ideal that the court represents. And if so, are we doing enough to ensure that its work is well supported? We cannot assume that the court will always remain the vital and active institution that it is today. Recent history has shown that it is possible for once vibrant institutions to grow moribund or be paralyzed by politics overnight. We must avoid this with regard to the court. It is with this in mind that my delegation would like to offer 3 reflections on the way forward. First, we must consider the issue of providing adequate resources for the effective functioning of the court. The report of the court records what it describes as an extremely high level of activity in the past year. The court has issued 4 judgments, 20 orders, held 6 public hearings, and inscribed 7 new cases on its list, 5 contentious cases, and 2 advisory opinions. And it has done so on a budget that has remained fairly constant at around US $29 million, which represents less than 1% of the regular budget of the United Nations. Let's compare this to the $6 billion that we spend here at the UN annually on peacekeeping and the US $750 million that is spent on special political missions last year. And against these figures, it is very clear that we are significantly under-investing in an institution that plays a critical role in ensuring the peaceful settlement of disputes and the rule of law. The scale of this underinvestment in the peaceful settlement of disputes is made starker when we consider the numbers. The court's docket is now the fullest it has been in memory, with 20 cases on the general list 17 of which were filed in the past 5 years. There are now a staggering 85 states, or nearly half of the UN membership, which are involved in pending cases before the court, whether as parties or interveners. And it's not just the number of cases involved, but their complexity. Provisional measures are now requested in nearly half of the contentious cases currently on the court's docket, each requiring an abridged hearing and expedited treatment. Despite this, the court has only asked for a very modest increase to its budget this year, mostly for additional resources to support the General Assembly's request for an advisory opinion on the obligation of states in respect of climate change. This Assembly approved the court's budget last year, and my delegation hopes that we can do so again smoothly this year. But looking ahead, there is a clear need to provide the court with a more substantial increase in resources to reflect the substantial increase in its workload and to place the court on a more secure financial footing. It is crucial that we provide the court with the resources it needs to do the vital work that we, the member states, have tasked and rely on it to do. My delegation calls on all member states to show leadership in this matter. And it is critical that each one of us individually and all of us collectively commit to investing more resources in the peaceful settlement of disputes. The second point that I wanted to make, Mr. President, relates to the issue of access to justice. The report of the court describes recourse to the court as a cost-effective solution, which is an understated way of putting the matter. My delegation agrees with this assessment and would like to commend the court for its efficiency, as we note that the average period between the conclusion of oral proceedings and the delivery of a judgment or an advisory opinion by the court does not exceed 6 months. In this connection, my delegation is pleased to note that 3 awards were made from the Trust Fund for the Judicial Fellowship Program this year to support the participation of 3 nationals of developing countries who were nominated by universities located in developing countries. Singapore was pleased to have been part of the group of 5 states that coordinated the General Assembly resolution to establish the Trust Fund, because we believe that access to opportunity is a critical part of access to justice. We have no doubt that the selected judicial fellows will benefit immensely from their participation and return home to share their experiences and contribute to the cause of international justice. Finally, I turn to the issue of outreach and communication by the court. As President of the court, Judge Donoghue observed at the 75th anniversary of the court, and although the court is known as the World Court, it did not originally live up to that name. In 1946, the UN only comprised 51 member states, and representatives from only 44 states participated in the Committee of Jurists that drafted the court's statute. Furthermore, at that time, more than 750 million people lived in colonies or non-self-governing territories, and therefore had no role in shaping the statutes of the court. The picture, of course, has since changed. The UN now comprises 193 member states, each one sovereign and equal. And the states that are parties to the contentious cases pending before the court comprise 4 from the Asia-Pacific, 5 from the group of Latin American and Caribbean states, 3 from the African group, 6 from the Eastern European group, and 8 from the group of Western European and other states. One can say that the court now is truly universal, and it is a court that belongs to all of us because it hears and adjudicates cases from all over the world. Mr. President, more needs to be done, in our view, to explain the purposes of the court and its activities to people around the world, especially to young people around the world. The hallowed halls of the Peace Palace seem a world far away where the disputes it adjudicates are playing out. And it bears noting that while the statutes and rules of the court allows for it, the court has never sat outside The Hague. This bears reflection. In a similar vein, while my delegation commends the President and members of the court and the registrar for giving regular presentations on the work of the court, we note that almost all of these took place at The Hague or in New York. If opportunity avails, we would encourage the members of the court and its supporters to consider initiatives where possible that would spread awareness of the vital work of the court to other parts of the world, especially in developing countries. It is important to communicate the values and purposes of the court to people around the world, especially to the youth of the world. We need the next generation to be advocates and champions of the court and to be advocates of a multilateral rules-based system founded on international law. Mr. President, I've spoken at length today because my delegation considers the issues that we have raised to be critical for many of us, especially the small countries for whom international law and the role of the court is fundamental, if not existential. The UN Charter records our collective determination, and I quote, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. Closed quotes. The peaceful settlement of disputes is a critical part of the multilateral system, and a vital part of discharging this responsibility rests on the court. And it is our duty as members of the General Assembly and the United Nations to support the court in its work. In closing, Mr. President, I echo the words of former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, who on the 60th anniversary of the court described it, I quote, as a central element of our international society, closed quote. I could not agree more, and I wish the court, including the judges that will be elected to the court next week, every success in the year ahead. I thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Singapore. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I make this statement on behalf of the delegation of the Sultanate of Oman as part of the debate of the General Assembly in its 78th session of item 73, entitled Report of the International Court of Justice. This is an important topic for my country. Through this session, we review the functions of a principal organ of the United Nations. In this regard, I would like to extend our thanks to the Secretary General of the United Nations for his report contained in document A/78/194. And I also thank the President of the ICJ for her comprehensive briefing on the activities of the court in the reporting period as contained in document A/78/4. The delegation of the Sultanate of Oman aligns itself with the statement made by Jordan on behalf of the Arab group and the statement made by Mauritania on behalf of the OIC and the statement made by Azerbaijan on behalf of the non-aligned movement. We stress the principled position for the need of peaceful settlement of disputes and refraining from the threat or use of force as set forth in the Charter of the United Nations and in accordance with its principles. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the efforts to promote the relation between the organs of the UN, particularly the General Assembly and the ICJ, include the tradition of the debate on the annual report by the ICJ at the GA, so that the member states would understand the work of the court and discuss pertaining issues. We see a number of countries bringing their disputes to the ICJ, which is an acceptance of the jurisdiction of the court. In this regard, the Sultanate of Oman supports the General Assembly Resolution 77/247, dated the 30th of December 2022, where the General Assembly requested, in accordance with Article 96 of the Charter, that the ICJ render an advisory opinion on the legal effects of Israel's ongoing violation of the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the legal consequences of its occupation, annexation, and settlement of the occupied Palestinian territory, and on the impact of Israel's policies and practices as set forth in 18A of Resolution 77/247 on the legal status of occupation and legal impact of this for all states and the UN. And we stress the Sultanate of Oman's position supporting the Palestinian people in the right to self-determination and the establishment of the independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital on the 4th of June lines in accordance with Security Council resolutions and other international resolutions, and the Arab Peace Initiative, and the principle of land for peace, and the vision of the international community for the two-state solution, and in line with the rules and principles of international law, and in support of the diplomatic and legal action led by the State of Palestine to maintain the rights of the Palestinian people and to protect them from the crimes by the Israeli occupation powers. We believe the international community needs to shoulder its responsibility to end settlement and Israeli plans to annex parts of the occupied Palestinian territory, and the need to maintain the legal, historic, and religious status of the occupied city of Jerusalem, including steps for Palestine to be recognized as a full-fledged member of the UN. We have presented our written statement to the ICJ in The Hague in accordance with Resolution 77/247, which requested the International Court of Justice to render an advisory opinion on the legal consequences arising from the ongoing violation by Israel of the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination. In light of the ongoing flagrant and systematic Israeli violations of international law as it continues its occupation of Palestinian territory, the court must decide that the government of Israel needs to immediately cease all activities, policies, and laws that obstruct the right of Palestinians to self-determination by ending the occupation of the Palestinian territory. And the court must acknowledge the clear responsibility of all states for upholding the right to self-determination of the Palestinians in line with the UN resolutions and its charter. The impartiality and the quality of the work of the ICJ is the reason why it is trusted by the states that resort to its role for the dispute resolution as the main and principal organ of the UN, and its intangible role in issuance of orders, judgments, and advisory opinions for the peaceful settlement of disputes within the principle of the rule of law at the international level. Mr. President, the Sultanate of Oman is committed to the principles of the UN and its charter. We respect international law and we respect the principles of non-interference in the domestic affairs of states and the peaceful settlement of disputes and refraining from the use or threats of use of force, supporting dialogue among states. We have a conviction that resolving disputes through this amicable spirit is a civilized behavior that leads to better results than those achieved through dispute, including we commend the role of the ICJ in promoting peaceful settlement of disputes in line with the principles and provisions of the Charter. We support the ICJ in its work towards adherence to the provisions of international law and the principles of the Charter, and the role of the UN to promote the relation between the different organs of the UN, particularly the ICJ, as the principal organ of the organization. I thank you.
The distinguished representative of Oman. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Mr. President, at the outset, Malaysia would like to thank the President of the ICJ, Judge John Donoghue, for her report on the work of the court. Malaysia aligns itself with the statement delivered by Azerbaijan on behalf of the non-aligned movement and Mauritania on behalf of the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation. We appreciate the continued dedication of the court as reflected in the report. For the period of reporting, Malaysia notes that the court delivered judgments in 4 cases, handed down 20 orders, held public hearings in 6 cases, and was seized of 5 new contentious cases and 2 requests for advisory opinions. This is a clear expression of the continued confidence of member states in the court. Mr. President, Malaysia is committed to the purpose and principles of the United Nations in promoting and upholding the rule of law. We honor the indispensable role of the International Court of Justice as the principal judicial organ of the United Nations and its independence and integrity. We reaffirm our recognition of the court's important role in the development of international law, contribution to the peaceful settlement of international disputes, and the maintenance of international peace and security. To this end, Malaysia values the court's legal advisory opinions in accordance with Article 96 of the United Nations Charter. The advisory opinions, albeit non-binding, carry strong legal weight and moral authority. An example of this advisory opinion that has enduring salience is the one rendered in July 1996 on the question, is the threat or use of nuclear weapons in any circumstance permitted under international law? In this seminal opinion, the court recognized that the threat or use of nuclear weapons is generally contrary to the rules of international law applicable in armed conflict, particularly the rules and principles of humanitarian law. The court further declared unanimously that there exists a legal obligation to pursue in good faith and bring to a conclusion negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament in all its aspects under strict and effective international control. With this advisory opinion, the Court has set legal parameters whereby the use of nuclear weapons indeed ignores customary international law and international treaties. In this regard, Malaysia since 1996 has annually tabled to the First Committee and the General Assembly a resolution entitled Follow-up to the Advisory Opinion of the International Court of Justice on the legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons. We invite member states that have not done so to support and co-sponsor the draft resolution at this session of the First Committee. Mr. President, Malaysia reiterates our call for the organs of the United Nations, especially the Security Council, to utilize the Court's issuance of advisory opinions. We support the current advisory proceedings on the question of Palestine at the ICJ, as requested by the General Assembly through its resolution 77/242 adopted on 30th December 2022. Against the backdrop of Israel's belligerent military aggression on the occupied Palestinian territory, it is now more important than ever to put an end to Israel's illegal settlement and despicable apartheid practices. The ICJ advisory opinion will provide credence and valuable support to the Palestinians' push for their inalienable rights to self-determination in an independent and sovereign state of Palestine. Malaysia equally calls upon the international community to hold Israel accountable for its continued illegal settlement, which constitutes a flagrant violation under international law. Mr. President, as the principal legal organ of the United Nations, Malaysia believes that the authority of the Court should be strengthened and further provided with a fresh purpose in the new agenda for peace. To this end, Malaysia continues to recognize the contribution of ICJ in upholding the primacy of the rule of law in the maintenance of international peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. My delegation aligned itself with a statement made by the delegation of Azerbaijan on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Ecuador thanks the President of the International Court of Justice for presenting the report of the activities of the court from the 1st of August 2022 until the 31st of July 2023. Against an international backdrop marked by the greatest number of conflicts since the Second World War, the role of the Court as the principal judicial organ of the United Nations and the only international tribunal with general jurisdiction of international law is of particular relevance. The Court is an indispensable organ to ensure the obligations established in Article 1 of the Charter to bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to a breach of the peace. This is why we welcome the sustained increase in the volume of the Court's work in both contentious and advisory matters. Of the 20 cases currently pending, 17 were filed over the last 5 years. We note with interest the variety of cases presented and the broad geographical variety of states which are referring cases to the consideration of the Court. This attests to the confidence which states have in the impartiality and independence of the Court. This trust is also based upon the obligation that we as states all have to enforce the Court's decisions in cases in which we are involved, including provisional measures. We value the efforts of the Court to ensure the dissemination of its judgments through its publications, its multimedia broadcasts and its website. These are materials for consultation by states, practitioners of international law and academia. Likewise, we support the Court's role in promoting the rule of law through its academic programmes and public programmes. And we underline the importance of bolstering programmes of internships for students and professionals from developing countries so as to contribute to capacity building. Moreover, we reiterate the complementary nature of the responsibilities of the Court and of the Security Council in maintaining peace and security. In this regard, we urge the Security Council to examine the mechanisms established within the Charter to shore up this complementarity, including those contained in Articles 94 and 96 of the Charter. I wish to conclude by expressing our gratitude to both the judges of the Court and the members of its Secretariat for their commitment to the good functioning of the Court, whilst reiterating our support for the Court receiving sufficient resources for it to accomplish its mission. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ecuador. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Mr. President. The International Court of Justice is the primary judicial body of the United Nations, the world's court. We applaud the ICJ's significant contribution to the progressive development of international law and to the strengthening of the rule of law at the international level. Mr. President, the ICJ can only fully engage in the peaceful resolution of disputes when member states are willing to accept its jurisdiction. Regrettably, only 73 UN member states have accepted the court's compulsory jurisdiction, which means nearly 2/3 of the UN membership have yet to do so. We therefore renew our call on all states to make declarations under Article 36 of the Statute of the ICJ in order to strengthen its reach and impact, in line with the declaration on promoting the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice led by Romania. We also believe that given the ICJ's important relationship with the Security Council, all states aspiring to serve on the Council as permanent members, as well as those with permanent seats, should set a positive example by accepting the Court's compulsory jurisdiction. Mr. President, the importance of the International Court of Justice is also mirrored in the relevance of its pending cases and decisions. And in this respect, it is important that third states also engage with the Court to provide their views and interpretations of relevant international law. This is why Liechtenstein has engaged, in particular, in the ICJ's pending advisory opinion over the legal consequences of the occupation of Palestine by Israel, and in the case of Ukraine versus the Russian Federation on the allegation of genocide under the UN Genocide Convention. Liechtenstein submitted written pleadings in both cases, and in the latter case we also co-presented our position during the oral proceedings together with Austria, Czechia and Slovakia. And with respect to the ICJ's Myanmar versus Gambia case, we recall General Assembly Resolution 396 should guide all credentials decisions in the UN system, including before the International Court of Justice. Mr. President, the International Court of Justice, in its advisory capacity, plays an important role in providing clarity on complex questions of international law. This tool offers states authoritative guidance regarding the application of international law. Liechtenstein is encouraged by the growing trend of states seeking advisory opinions from the Court. This strengthens the role of this assembly as a primary driver for resolving international legal uncertainties. In this context, we took an active part in Vanuatu's core group in seeking an advisory opinion from the ICJ on climate change. The core group is, in many ways, a testament to effective multilateralism. And led by Vanuatu, it highlighted the ability of smaller nations to bring crucially important proposals before this assembly. Climate change is indeed a complex issue that affects us all in various ways and that raises many difficult questions. From weather extremes to sea level rise, the relentless impacts of climate change know no boundaries, affecting every corner of our world. In light of its status as paramount existential issue of our time, we need clear and well-reasoned legal answers to be able to address the challenge appropriately. We trust that the International Court of Justice will provide the clarity needed to navigate the complexities of international law concerning climate change, especially at the intersection with human rights. In this context, we affirm our commitment to making a submission to the ICJ in pursuit of these crucial answers and look forward to its opinion and guidance on this vital global issue. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
Thank you. President, Malta aligns itself to the statement delivered by the European Union. Malta attaches great importance to the